2 weeks of anti-government protests and Egypt is on a knife edge. Hosni Mubarak declares he won't run again for president. His son, Gamal, has been ruled out as the next in line. And a vice president, Omar Suleiman, has been appointed for the first time in 30 years. Egypt's health ministry says 11 people have been killed. But agencies report more than 300 deaths, with thousands more wounded. When protests began on the 25th of January, peaceful demonstrations were met with a brutal police force. As the calls for regime change move into their third week, Egyptians have broken down the barrier of fear. But cracks between the protesters have started to show.
What was really interesting about the third week of these protests is that everyone was talking about the momentum and momentum being lost, but the momentum that was being lost wasn't actually inside Liberation Square, where people were very much still united together in this quest to bring down Hosni Mubarak. The momentum that was changing was outside of the square in the other parts of Cairo and beyond, where people had started to say, well, listen, Hosni Mubarak has now said that he won't run again. You only have to bear him for another few months. Why don't the protesters just leave the square? They've got what they want. So people were talking about a loss of momentum, but we never felt that inside Liberation Square. We only felt it outside.
I announced that I will similarly remain adamant to continue to shoulder my responsibility.
An immovable head of state and resolute protesters standing firm on their call for the president to resign. Egypt has reached deadlock. Tahrir Square has become a tent city, a permanent vigil for the anti-government protesters.
They're every single night they're sleeping under the wheels of tanks and armoured personnel carriers, determined not to be squeezed in, as they put it, with this protest.
The mood by that morning had begun to shift a little bit in the sense that shops were opening, stores were opening, very basic stuff, but enough to get enough commercial activity going where people themselves were beginning to question whether or not this prolonged standoff was serving the interests of the country or whether or not it was being somewhat detrimental to the economic activity of daily life.
A fading momentum and Mubarak's promises of reform have threatened to derail the anti-government movement.
Well, by the time we had entered the third week, we could clearly see that there was no progress being made in terms of the talks. I mean, President Mubarak was adamant on trying to engage the protesters through political means. He was trying to appease them with what was described as half-hearted measures. And the protesters were very much defiant. You know, on more than one occasion, we felt that they were, you know, maybe their support was going to wane, perhaps their morale was going to decrease. But in reality, it never did.
Calls for regime change are in danger of dying out. But anti-government protesters receive a spark of hope from an unknown Egyptian. Google executive and political activist Wael Ghonem is released after his arrest by plainclothes policemen at the start of the protests. As an architect of the dissent that ignited a revolution, his emotional interview injects a sense of purpose into the softening protests.
I want to say to every mother and every father that lost his child, I'm sorry, but this is not our fault. I swear to God, this is not our fault. It is the fault of everyone who is holding on to power greedily and would not let it go. I want to leave.
Wael Ghonem's interview was definitely a game changer in the sense that it gave the protesters a huge public morale boost, and certainly one of great importance at a very critical time.
He spoke in this way that really, pulled on the heartstrings of the protesters and in the Egyptian population in general, which by that point was starting to lose a little bit of that momentum and that really strong feelings that they were having towards the revolution. It humanized the revolution in a way that maybe it hadn't been humanized in the weeks beforehand.
As long as you are standing here, you are a hero. You are the heroes.
مصر فوق الجميع. 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 مصر فوق الجميع.
As day breaks, the hundreds of Egyptians killed over the last 3 weeks are mourned. Thousands flock to Tahrir Square in the largest protest march against Mubarak yet, proof that they are still a force to be reckoned with. But the government message remains defiant, and Vice President Omar Suleiman delivers an ominous warning. There will be no ending of the regime and no immediate departure for President Hosni Mubarak.
This issue, we come around again to the issue of trust. And I have to say that you won't find many people or anyone who will trust assurances from this regime, whether it comes from Suleiman or anyone within the regime. Of course, everyone knows that the resounding message coming out of that massive demonstration is that Hosni Mubarak must step down.
Many of the protesters joined the demonstrations in Tahrir Square for the first time. Protests overflow onto bridges over the Nile and into squares in central Cairo.
A new kind of people who have joined these protests, civil servants, teachers, people who maybe wouldn't have come here. Today's a day where they feel that their message is actually being heard in a wider circle than they originally thought.
A number of parallel demonstrations are reported across the country. Ismailia, Asyut, El Mahala El Kubra, and Alexandria.
There are tens of thousands of people still gathered here in Alexandria as we enter the third week of these anti-government protests. Alexandria obviously has been a flashpoint several times throughout these unprecedented unfolding scenarios in Egypt.
In Cairo, the military maintains a presence around Tahrir Square as protesters take policing into their own hands.
Protesters themselves have allocated certain people who check those who go inside and check their ID cards. But because there are just so many people, like thousands of people, as I was trying to come here, going the other way into Liberation Square, it's proving pretty difficult. But so far, there's still a very positive atmosphere, even given these long queues, people going around the corner, around the bridge, into the streets, waiting to get inside. No one seems upset about it. No one seems angry. They're very, very orderly, and as I said, a very positive atmosphere inside that square right now.